But we ought to give everybody, we ought to go at least till 5:02, I think, right? Before we.
Cheryl.
Well, then I thought you were sequestered out on Cattail Lane, and there you are in Hawaii.
Yeah, here we are. We're in reality here.
No.
Okay, I started recording.
Okay. That's good.
No, Linda
That's
Robinson.
good.
Nice to see you, Nancy.
So great to see you, Linda, and you too, Allison and Alex.
Yeah.
It's thrilling, and it's nice to meet you. I forget your
it's-
first name.
Oh, Allison Reed. Yeah, nice.
Yeah, that's what it says.
There. Hi. Hi,
Hi.
everybody.
Hello.
Good to see you, Nancy and Ann and Brad.
Yeah, this is fun. I'm gonna go get a glass of wine because it's book club, you know.
Have to, right? Does everyone know how to use the chat function to send in questions?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we've all been doing this. It seems like forever.
Yeah. We like it, actually.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I think we'll start. And the first thing I have to do, Beth, is I can't remember I think the year was 2000, right? When you came to Fishtrap. 2000 or 2001?
I don't think it was 2001. I actually think well, no, you're right. I think it was 2000 or 2001. I don't remember. No, it was in the late 90s. I really feel like I'm dating myself at this point. Just guess. It was sometime in the general past.
That's right. That's right. But the point being is that we did a fish trap. We did a fish trap session, and we had not all, but mostly all American Indian writers. And Beth at the time, we didn't know her. She was a student and adjunct faculty at U of O. And she came along kind of as the guest of Mark Trahan. And Mark at the time was editing the Navajo Times, right? I think he was still then. Or maybe he was on.
He was at the Salt Lake Tribune.
Oh, maybe he had left.
Or
then.
maybe it was after. Anyway, he was.
Yeah, I was in that general thing. Anyway, so Beth came along with Mark, and she read at an open mic, and she was there, and she read from a novel. I'm going to ask her about that later, but she read from a novel, and then we liked her reading. And at the time, Fishtrap had this writer-in-residence program, so we said, Beth, would you like to come and spend a couple of months here next year? And so she did. And she was a great writer-in-residence, so she spent time in all 3 county schools. And she happened to be here. I remember when we had a meeting at the Homeland Project in Wallowa, and there were some old people from Colville came, and one of the older women remembered your grandfather, as I recall. Am I right there? Yeah. Anyway, after that, Beth kind of disappeared from my sight for a while, and I don't remember exactly how we reconnected, but when we reconnected, here she was teaching at Berkeley, writing all these academic articles. And all of a sudden, then she had this manuscript of poems and plays and stories. And so we started corresponding about that. And then she helped those of us, you who are here and familiar with it, when we did the sculpture project and brought Doug Hyde's Atwewise, I hope I'm saying that right, the return here that sits in our front courtyard. I wrote to all the elders because Doug wanted to call it the return. And all the elders and Beth took that information to Harua Owoki, who was the chronicler of the Nez Perce language and the author of the dictionary. And they searched and they found the precise word. Atwewise, return from a difficult journey. And so that's how that whole thing started. And then Beth came back up here for Fishtrap this summer, and last summer, and she was planning to come again this summer. And so we don't know what's happening. But at any rate, so that's my little introduction. And that what Beth and I kind of agreed to is she'll do a short reading, and then I might have one question to kick it off, and then I'll open it up to your questions. Does that make sense, folks? Okay. Beth, go ahead. I will mute myself.
Katsiya, Tatsalah. Thank you, Rich, and good evening. And thank you, everyone, for coming out or in, over. I don't know exactly what the right way to say it, but it's really nice to be in this space with you and to be in the Wallowas, the ancestral homelands of Nez Perce people. It's really a pleasure to be with you tonight. I should say Rich really has been such an incredible supporter of writers and writing in the West. And Rich was really significant in actually helping me get my book, The Beadworkers, published. And I'm very grateful for the connection that I was able to make through Rich. That was very critical for this book actually coming to light. So I'm grateful for that. So I guess I could just start. I decided to just read probably the shortest story that is part of this collection. I hope we'll have a couple of minutes. I think most of you have a copy of the book, but I do want to talk a little bit about the cover because I can't help myself, and I think the cover is beautiful. So I'm just going to read a very short story and say a couple words about what inspired this story. The story is the shortest one in the collection, and it's called Rootless. The problem was we were trying to board the bus during shift change. We waited as the arriving passengers streamed out. But the second my foot touched the step, the bus driver's hand went up. You gotta wait, miss. She pointed to a cordoned off area on the sidewalk approximately 5 feet away. You wait over there. A burly man and I exchanged looks, then wheeled our bags a long way around to reassemble behind the flat yellow tape. Perhaps it was the heat, or perhaps it was to cover our docility, but we did nothing to intercept the thin woman. We just stood there and watched her attempt to board the bus, observing the driver's mouth move and the finger point in our direction. The woman maneuvered into line with us. She wore jeans and a linen tunic and her longish blonde hair in bangs. The man stepped back and gestured for her to get in line in front of him. The new driver, carrying a small bag and clipboard, arrived and boarded the bus. The air is thick here, the woman said. Is the air thick here? I scanned the bunch grass of the estuary, then the sky above the city. Yes, I said, although I had no real basis for my statement. The doors of the bus snapped open and the first driver stepped out, waving goodbye to the new one. I haven't been here in 2 years, the woman said. Lost a lot of weight since then, 70 pounds. Really? I asked, and saw the burly man turn his face toward us. The woman looked like the type who had been thin all her life, and 70 extra pounds was something to picture. How'd you do it? Stress. The bus woke with a rumble and rolled forward 5 feet, exhaling as it stopped in front of us. The doors popped open and we boarded. The woman slid into the row of seats that faced the baggage rack, and I sat down too, not too close. Her hair was flecked with gray, and her forearms were covered with freckles. I've been taking photographs for the last 9 years, in Nevada, Virginia City, she said. Taking photographs of tourists. Can you believe it? People come from all over the world to dress up like cowboys and whores. The woman carried a soft brown leather purse, the kind sewn with the nap side out, with a long shoulder strap. It was trimmed with turquoise beads and fringe. She held a thick paperback novel called Shenandoah on her lap. You don't have any bags, I said, as the bus pulled away from the curb. That's right. She threw her arms in the air. It's an adventure. Just then my phone rang. I fished it out from my bag, pushing aside a small container of camas roots. I was returning home from root feast on the res, or maybe I was returning to exile, taking my roots with me. It doesn't seem right that one should be returning on both sides of a journey, but that's how it felt. On the phone, I explained to my boyfriend that my plane had been delayed, so I would be in the station a bit longer. Call me when you get to MacArthur, she said. When I hung up, the woman said, if you ever run away from home, hold on to that thing, because you just can't put a coin in a box anymore. No, I guess not. You can't even find a payphone. When did that happen? It's too bad. Sometimes you need a phone like that. She shrugged. What are you going to do? The bus rolled noisily past warehouses and taco trucks. She leaned toward me. Will you help me listen? For the station. I have trouble, she said, pointing to her right ear. Oh, I said. Don't worry. The shuttle goes straight there. No stops. And which one? Coliseum. Is it north or south of the city? South. Okay, I'm going to Albany. That's a bit north. Yeah, my friend is going to meet me. There's no stop in Albany. Okay, then the next stop? El Cerrito. El Cerrito stop. Thank you for being so kind. I told her it was nothing. It's no hardship to recite the train schedule. We're going to the ocean, going to get some air. You know, there's less oxygen in Nevada. 16% less oxygen at that elevation. Wow. I'm glad to be out of there. I bet. This morning I left my cat and my husband. For good? Or just temporarily? For good. Yeah. I didn't say anything. I felt bad about the cat. I've left men before. I wondered if I should say something about the cat. Neither of us said anything for a few minutes, and then I realized that she was crying. That crazy bastard damn near broke my nose, she said. A laugh sputtered out. Now I don't know what. You're doing the right thing. Tell me I can't cry here, she said. I can cry when I get to my friend's house, but not here. Can't be crying in Oakland. People cry in Oakland, but I knew what she meant. That's right, I said. Stiff upper lip then. I felt awkward saying it, but I felt a moral obligation to be chipper. She wiped her eyes quickly with an index finger. I'll just cry into my hat, she said. She choked on a laugh again. But I forgot my hat. Now there's the tragedy. She choked and laughed some more. You're good, she said. That is a tragedy. You can't go outside without a hat in Nevada. No, that sun will kill you. I can't believe I left it. I wanted to say that she would get a new hat, but I didn't want to burden her with metaphors. The bus arrived at the station and we filed out. The woman went to buy a ticket and I took the stairs to the platform. That's the end of that story. I just wanted to explain a little bit about this story. It is very short and episodic. So in that way, it's a little bit like some of our traditional stories where there's just one little episode that's part of someone traveling. Usually it's Coyote traveling. But the real emphasis in this story was Kate Shanley, who is Blackfeet's academic. She teaches at University of Montana. One time we were talking and she said, you know, sometimes Native literature is about what doesn't happen. And so I decided to write a story about what doesn't happen. So what we don't often see in stories is the Native person who's the one who's familiar with the city, the one who's safe and secure, the one who has not no home, but multiple homes, the one who's at home on the res and at home in the city and carrying her roots everywhere. The Native person isn't usually the one who's trying to help. In stories, we don't often see, oh, here's the Native woman trying to help this poor white woman who's really needs help in lots of ways. So that's what that story is about. Sometimes people have, read it and thought, what is this? So I just thought I'd give you a little insight into what I was thinking. And all of the stories in the collection are fairly diverse in form and also genre. In fact, it was hard for me to find a publisher for the book because it works in so many forms, and even the short stories aren't very much like each other. So, I was very happy that my publisher, who I met because of Rich, very happy that my publisher was willing to put the word stories on the front, because to me, they're all stories, even the play, even the poem, are stories. And the one thing that ties every piece together is there's a piece of beadwork in every piece, or there's someone doing beadwork. And I decided that is the only thing that's going to connect all of these pieces.
Well, it's eclectic, and it does follow. It's eclectic, and it moves in time as well as geography, and as well as the ages of the protagonists. So you cover a lot of territory. I think Elnora wants to say something. Go ahead, Elnora. Did you come on?
Yeah, Beth, I really appreciate your explaining what ties those stories together, because I too found them quite disparate. I live in Albany, so a lot of your locales really resonate with me. And let's see. And I'm just wondering how you marry your academic career with your fiction writing. Is there a tension there? Is one a release from the other? Are they separate sides of who you are? If you could just talk a little bit more about that, I would love to know.
Okay, thank you. Yes, a lot of the book is either up and down the Columbia or up and down I-5. Those are the coordinates of the book mostly. And I would say that my academic work for many years has really fed. I should say that I've had a lot of experience, or the first part of my career, I worked as a journalist, which is how I met Mark Trahant, who then eventually brought me to Fishtrap. I, growing up, always wanted to be a writer, and I grew up on a farm in Idaho, and my mom's side is Nez Perce, my dad's side is like German Mennonite farmers. So I grew up with this very practical orientation, and the most I could dream for myself as a young person was I want to be paid to write. So being a journalist was one way into that, but I never, as a young person, had enough courage to say I want to be a novelist, or I want to be a poet or creative writer. I just thought I have to get a job writing because I want to be a writer. So I started out as a reporter, and then I eventually went to graduate school and earned a PhD, and then became a professor and academic. And in between there were multiple interludes of waiting tables and working in grocery stores and doing low-wage labor.
Yeah.
And part of this process, though, is I still see like all writing as writing, and just what's the most effective genre for what I want to do or what I have to do right now. So when I first got this job at Berkeley, I was like, well, what I have to do and what I like to do is write these academic articles, because by then I had 2 small children. I was like, okay, I gotta pay the rent. So, and also I wanted to be a professor. I really love reading other people's work and analyzing it and thinking about the relationship. My dominant area is literature and law, and then I also study Nez Perce language and Nez Perce literature. And so the focus study actually then fed my creative work and gave me ideas that I could work out creatively. So I have a lot of ideas that are analytical and arguments that I just decide, do I want to write an article about this? Do I want this to be a journal piece or an academic book? Or do I want it to be a short story or a poem to work out this idea? So I think in my book, like the story Fish Wars, I was always really fascinated with, I've always been and continue to be fascinated with the Northwest fishing wars. And one of the things that sort of filters through all of my work is that the Indian wars are wars on Indian families. And I always ask myself, what would I do if, you know, we just saw this at Standing Rock. We're seeing it at Mauna Kea right now. What do you do when the war comes to your home, to your homelands, where you have to defend your treaty rights at home? Your children are there. How do you keep them safe? And I wanted to show that children were on the front lines of the fish wars. So I could make that argument as an academic. I could write an academic article making that argument. But I also thought another way I can make that argument is by writing a first-person narrative of an 11-year-old girl who starts figuring out what's going on. And I really wanted to show how difficult it would be as a parent and as a family member to make strategic decisions in the moment. How do we keep everyone safe while still defending the treaties? And what if the parents don't agree on the strategy? And a lot of the book is actually about Native people relationships in intense, intimate relationships with each other who just don't agree about how to do things. What they should do. The whole play is about that at the end, Antikoni. So all those things, in general, I feel like my two areas, or these areas where I work, language and literature and creative writing, like I feel like they feed each other intellectually and creatively. Where I run into trouble a little bit is time and energy. And so I think, you know, lately it's been much more that I'm more willing to only write and not spend as much time teaching or doing other things.
Thank you.
I think one secret is you must not sleep very much. But but kind of picking up on that, Beth. So your journey, you had 2 or 3 journeys going simultaneously. Of course, the parenthood journey, but the journey. I'd like you to say a little bit about your journey back with language and to Nez Perce roots, because you were doing that while you were also doing an academic journey. And learning a language is not an insignificant task in itself. So how did they weave together over the last years?
I will answer this question quickly and then come back at it at the end. And also I want to slip in this story that this question that came in from Brad Stevens, because I saw he posted something in the chat box too, and I don't want Brad to feel ignored. I did start studying, so my auntie and uncle were both first language speakers, and I tried to learn some things from her. When I went to graduate school in 2001, I started working with Professor Aoki, who was retired and living in Berkeley. And he just sat down with me with a collection of narratives and the dictionary and taught me how the grammar worked. And to this day, he still helps me with my language study. But basically, that's what I do, is I carve out half an hour or more a day to just translate and work on language. And there have been big periods where I couldn't work on it as much as I want to, or work on it at all, but I've just kept working on it.
Very good. Okay. Yeah, Aoki apparently from what I hear from Nezpilim, in the fifth, I guess going back to the 50s. Aoki's what now? He's in his 90s, right?
He just turned 90 on April 1st.
Yeah. Did you get Ann and Brad's question in there, or you
Do you
going
want
to speak?
me to introduce it, or Brad, do you want to?
Yeah, go ahead.
Brad,
Well, you-
Stephen.
Here, no, this is Ann. I'm the one with the questions, even though it says Brad.
Oh, okay.
But just it was the first thing I thought of when I read your book was I wonder which genre she likes the best, which is her favorite.
I think what I have been most comfortable with is short stories so far. And I do love short stories. There's so many things they can do. I think they're just a real playground for experimentation. And but I am working now on poems, and I hope to write a novel. I'm working on it. But I do have a special place in my heart for short stories, I'd have to say.
Other questions out there? Be
Yeah,
bold.
this is Elnora again. I have another question. So Beth, you mentioned Nez Perce writers, and I have a reason to go to Minneapolis at least once a year, and I always go to Birch Bark Books and sit down in a big chair in Louisa Ehrlich's bookstore and just start looking for novels by Indigenous writers. And I haven't yet come across, outside of you, Nez Perce writers. So are there ones you recommend?
I strongly recommend Michael Wasson. He grew up at Lapwai, and he's written a few chapbooks so far. So he's a fairly well-known poet, and Inez Hernandez Avila, who's a professor at UC Davis, she's Nez Perce and Chicana, and she's also a poet and essayist. I don't know of any novels by Nez Perce writers yet, but there may be some there.
Okay, thank you.
They're out there. So Trace, okay. You've been learning, you've obviously been not only studying language in Berkeley, but retracing, kind of covering the Columbia Plateau, right? You've done research on the fish wars. Have you spent time? Have you spent time at? It seems like you must have spent time at Warm Springs and at Yakima, as well as at Colville and Lapwai and Umatilla. Am I correct? Do you try to make it around the whole rounds, or do you see people from everywhere? How are you gleaning all these little bits of information?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I think, when you talk about Yakima or, the hot pickers, a lot of that is, some of that comes from just hearing people's stories and knowing that those are historical moments and experiences in those places, and feeling connected. And also, I went to Neely, the Northwest Indian Language Institute at University of Oregon a few years ago, and being able to learn more about how our languages are related, I think has also sort of shaped my thinking. And also, I feel related to these places even when I, through these other connections like language and stories, like when I'm translating stories and I come across the story and the narrator says, oh, this story comes from Yakima, and then tell the story in Nez Perce. That makes me feel connected to those people, even though there's no actual people that I know there. I feel like we have some shared meeting points around just cultural practices and beliefs. Like, oh, over there, their longhouse does it like us, except that it's like this. A lot of it is just I think I personally haven't been to as many of these places as I've just listened to other people talk about going around to other places and like, oh, over there they do it this way, and over there, you know, and oh, I knew this guy and he did this, or you know, just listen to people's stories a lot and then type.
And are you now in touch with when you were here the first time? As I recall, you weren't really in touch with any relatives at Colville at that point, were you?
Yeah, I still have some relatives up there. Soy Red Thunder is a relative of mine. But my grandfather had left when he was a young man to become a jazz performer. So I continue to be connected to people mostly in the language community up at Colville. And then maybe some of you folks here from around the Wallowas, you might know Woody Starr, Woodrow Starr, who lives over at Pendleton. His mother, he's my brother, who lives out there. So I feel, you know, I have connections to him in Pendleton, and then other folks over at Popway. So I still have a number of relatives around that area.
Elnora, I think your dog is barking.
I don't have a dog.
Oh.
My dog is barking outside, but I'm pretending.
Oh, your dog is barking. Okay.
Sorry.
So Beth, did your mom continue to keep in touch with people at Colville as you were growing up?
I went there a couple times when I was like in late elementary school.
Okay.
I did see a question from Allison Reed about the cover, and thank you so much. I love talking about the cover because I love the cover.
Yeah.
Thank you, Counterpoint.
It was I who asked about the cover. I'm Alexander Allison's husband.
Okay.
I believe that picture, I always look at pictures that come from the west side of downtown from the perspective of the Rose Garden. And it looks to me like those guys are standing there in the Rose Garden, probably after a Rose Festival parade. I moved to Portland in 1971, and the skyline in Portland was very reminiscent of your cover. It was before most of the towers came up, and the prominent building in the picture is the Georgia Pacific building, which is gone beyond gone. So it is a pretty ancient picture. And then the pixels of the guys on the horses seem to be breaking up, and it's almost some sort of a Photoshop working. So there must be a little bit of a story that goes with it.
It is. The way you're describing it as pixelated, it actually is beadwork. So this is a piece of art.
Wow.
That's it. Sorry.
No, your perception is correct.
I got into the skyline and not the beadwork.
It's actually it's a beaded image that is owned by the Portland Art Museum, and it's beaded by the Choctaw beadwork artist Marcus Ammerman. And the way he composed this image and beaded it was you have Mount Hood and the skyline of Portland. And then in the foreground, he has beaded an image based on a photograph from 1902. And the photograph is of Nez Perce chiefs gathering. And so the entire composite image is called The Gathering. And I love it. And I feel like it's so representative of my book because it is beadwork. There's a lot of blue sky up here, which is, I think, phenomenal. It represents all of that, intense labor. And I talked to Marcus about, like, what do you think is the connection between writing and beadwork? Because to me, the connection yes, that beadwork carries stories, right?
Yeah.
But there's also this sort of patient laying down one bead at a time is kind of, to me, was kind of like the process of beading, where you're just laying it down one at a time. And I think too, well, I'm going to hold off there for a second and say what Marcus's answer was. I think beadwork is the perfect left brain, right brain activity, because there is this part, you know, that's about the structure and the precision and the image, and the other part is about bringing the artistry to it. And I think that's such a great way to think about it. When I was thinking about calling the collection the Beadworkers and wanting to draw attention to people doing beadwork and to like all the things that beadwork can do to carry stories, to heal, to be an economic base, to establish your identity as I am Nez Perce and not Ojibwe or whatever. Like there are so many things that beadwork can do, and I tried to represent those different kinds of activities that beadwork does, but also the act of being at the beading table. I tried to make the experience of reading the book to be like that feeling of being at the beadwork table where everyone comes, you're carrying all the pain of your life, but it's not the center stage. It's just coming with you into that space where everyone's coming together and making things together, and beading and praying and telling stories and making each other laugh and making that suffering and those longings bearable by being together. And so I wanted the book to be this space where that kind of thing could happen, where people would feel safe and cared for and surrounded. And I hope it makes people laugh. Usually Native people think it's pretty funny, but we tend to have a dark sense of humor. The other part of beading is that to bead is to pray. And so there's also a strong emphasis throughout the book. Like that's the original meaning of bead from English or whatever, B-E-D-E, is to pray. And that's why you have rosary beads and things like that. It's like there's so that combination of the tactile, the creative, the soothing, the desire, the prayers, like all of those things working together. I feel like, you know, beadwork and all these ladies at their beading tables, like that's what's holding Indigenous America together, because like the core question is like, how do people survive, you know? So one of the things, just to go back to the cover for 1 second, one of the things I love about this image then is that the past and the present, the city and Mount Hood, the chiefs, like the teepee, the horses, they all exist on the same plane. It's all simultaneous. You know, we're at home, you know, we're here, the city's here, Mount Hood is here, the Columbia River is right behind that mountain. You know, it's all in the same space. And
the sky is blue.
The sky is blue. Our ancestors are with us. We're there too. We're all together. And I love the way the representation of the horses in their regalia and all the chiefs in their regalia is like, it's beadwork of beadwork. Like it's so fantastic. And I feel like the collection also has a lot of stories within stories.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Sorry, I could go on and on about
Me too.
love Marcus Ammerman's work, and I was so happy we were able to get this. Because I keep forgetting I'm a people identify me as a California writer. And in fact, I forgot about this because slightly embarrassing to admit this, but I was like, why didn't I get nominated for any of the like Northwest Book Awards? And then I was like, oh, because I am not eligible, because I feel like I am, like my book lives in Oregon and Washington and Idaho, like, but I actually don't. So I'm a California writer, even though I'm fundamentally constantly living in denial about the fact that I live in California and not here. Anyway, I'm going to look at a couple of these questions. There is an audio version of the book. I do want to say my Nez Perce pronunciation is not perfect, but I decided to be brave and to record myself speaking as a second language speaker who is not great at it. But I hope it encourages other people to be brave and study. And also some of it is really good. I mean, some of my pronunciation is really good and some of it's kind of cringy, but still the audiobook did receive an earphones award. So apparently it's fun to listen to.
Well, I have to say, Beth, that the stories where your voice is a contemporary tribal person, the language is beautifully right on. And it sounds exactly what I hear when I go to meetings at Colville, or I'm over at Umatilla, or people come over here for Tamcalix. And it's so much fun. And the couple of things occurred to me. Number one, on the language, we were talking about Etuewese and the pronunciation and the spelling, because the people at Lapway spell it one way and the other people spell it with, different marks. And Albert Andrews was here. And he's talking about it. And he put his finger in my chest and he said, "You're in the middle of us now." Ha, ha, ha.
I know. You want to start a war? It's going to be about spelling.
Well, and Albert said, we didn't have a written language. So these are all approximations, right?
They are.
Say what you want.
Well, and one of the hard things is that, the reason why you get in the middle of it is because these different writing systems came from different moments of colonization. So the Catholic priests, who are French speakers, had one way of writing the language, and then the Presbyterians had another way of writing the language, and then the linguists, depending on what time they were working on it, had different ways of writing. And then so people do have some deep investments, because your way of spelling, your orthography, reflects where your family comes from and what side of the war they were on, and who's Presbyterian and who's Catholic and who's treaty. And it's hard those are really strong, like, literal markers of identity that only recently, like in the past 10 or 15 years, people have been willing to transcend and say, people might not change their spelling style. I insist on my own style too, not my personal style, but the way I learned it. But people are much more willing to read and accept other people's styles, because there's some point in which people said, okay, we all have to be able to read everything. We have to understand all the orthographies, or else we can't go anywhere. So it's good. We have to be, I don't know what the equivalent is. There's a way of being multilingual, but I don't know what a word is for if you know one language in like 5 different orthographies. Multilexical or something. I don't know what it would be.
Ask Aoki. He might have a word for it.
Yeah.
Any other questions or chat things out there?
Yeah, Beth, this is Elnora again. I actually live in Albany, California.
Oh, Albany, California. You live right,
Yeah.
like right.
Right. Part of the year
Albany, I thought of Albany, Oregon, which again is evidence that I think I live in Oregon.
So, and I have gotten online in Lapway's language training program and tried to start teaching myself some of the Nez Perce words and phrases, but I am so envious of your ability to work with Mr. Aoki. Any chance he wants to run Nez Perce language classes in Berkeley this summer?
Well, I'll teach you.
Okay.
There you go.
So for those of you who don't know where Albany California is, it abuts Berkeley. So Eleanor is about a mile from me right now.
Right. I'm actually in Wallowa at the moment, but
What?
part of the year I'm here and part of the year I'm in Albany. So
So we should probably wrap up pretty soon. One more general question. Years ago when Sherman Alexie was here, he said, well, it used to be in America that you could have only one Indian writer de jour.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're up to 3 or 4. It seems to me that the audience for Indian writers has really broadened, and that this is maybe the way to get just as you've done in this book, to get some of the Indian perspective. What happened in the fish wars? What happened with the boarding schools? What happened with that? I taught a class and I showed a 5-minute clip from Walter Half Moon from. Anyway, he's Sioux, and he did a thing on the boarding school. The students were absolutely horrified. College juniors were absolutely horrified that we had boarding schools. They couldn't believe it. So anyway, all that stuff now, there are more of you writing about it. Do you think that we're really having some breakthroughs here? That white understanding is increasing?
I do think that I'm of two minds about that. I do think that there is more, I definitely think that there's more circulation of Native literature now, and there's more awareness. There's more, it is more part of a national literary consciousness. Having just, had a book come out and realizing what the machinery of the publishing world is, it's hard for me to be optimistic that the fundamental dynamic that there are a few superstars and everyone else is about the crumbs. It makes me less optimistic that that there will ever be any kind of saturation of literature by people of color. And I think even the most powerful sort of demographics like African-American literature, I think it's still fairly marginal in, like, if you look at the entire like literary world. So
yeah,
it's hard for me to be very optimistic, but so at one hand, I'm not very optimistic about the picture. I personally feel so happy that my book got published. But
right.
It's hard to publish short stories. Like, no agent would take me because short stories don't sell. So, and yet, as you're pointing out, like, short stories are one of the ways that we can create this proliferation of stories. We can tell lots of different kinds of stories about different kinds of experiences. And yet short stories aren't marketable. You have to have the novel, and the novel has to look a certain way to be a bestseller. It has to feel a certain way. Sherman Alexie went down a little bit, and Tommy Orange, who's fantastically talented, became the superstar. There's still only one superstar at any given time. Like, even though you can find more people who could probably name 5 Native writers now. I'm just going to stop answering this question. Going in circles.
Well, unless anybody else has a question, let's. Nancy, sounds like you're ready to ask a question. No? Okay. Well, why don't we let you wrap it up and read your new stuff, or any parting remarks for us up here?
Well, I just want to thank you again for spending time with me, and for buying my book at the Book Loft. I love Mary and love the Book Loft. I love the Wallowas, and I'm so grateful to have this chance to spend some time with you, and thank you for supporting my book. It means so much to me. I wanted to end by talking about my current project. I'm still writing short stories, but I'm also working on a poetry collection. And because I'm committed to language revitalization, I feel like creative writing is essential for moving our language efforts forward. And one of the things that's so brilliant about Nez Perce as a language is that its structure is polysynthetic. So there's a verb in the middle of the word, and then the who and the how are the prefixes, and the where and when are the suffixes. So you have whole sentences that are condensed into one word because of the structure of the language.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I'm trying to do in this book of poems that I'm writing is to really play with all of these different ways that the language can work, and to show how words can have the same root, and they seem unrelated at first, but then you start looking at the different configurations of that one word, and you see all these different concepts that come out from that one root.